In this brief presentation, I'll walk you through some of the key elements associated with writing your critically reflective essay. This presentation is designed to get you started thinking about and creating a strategy to attack this task. Just reminding you that this is task 3, your reflective essay. You've been asked to write a reflective essay in response to the following quote. To what extent does education mirror and to what extent does it shape societies? It always does some of both. Now that's come from your text, and throughout the tutorials we've been talking about aspects of education and highlighting the potential that they have to mirror or to shape society. You need to think about what this means to you and develop a response to the quote. Your response, which is your thesis statement, will inform the planning and writing that follows. Now, you don't have to agree with that statement, or you can somewhat agree, but what is important is that you spend some time thinking about that quote and developing a statement of your own. You can recycle that statement if you wish to. Your essay should demonstrate your ability to critically reflect on the topics presented in the unit, your wider reading, your own lived experiences, including your immersion experience, to develop arguments that support your position or your thesis statement. You will already know that the length is 2,500 words and that this task represents 50% of your grade, and that we are requiring you to use APA 6 referencing style. Preparing to write the essay. In this video, I'm going to step out 5 points or 5 strategies for you to get started with this. First, develop a thesis. 2, brainstorm, research, brainstorm again so that you can deconstruct the topics. Develop your arguments, research these and decide which ones you're going to include and which ones you're not going to include. Start to write your draft, research it again, write it again. Then in the final step, you'll get down to the editing and proofreading. Now, as you can see from those 5 steps, that this is not something you can do at the last minute. So please start now. I know many of you are anxious and wanting to get some guidance on this. So here we go. Developing a thesis. As I said before, please use the quote to develop a clear statement or standpoint of your own. Think carefully about what it means to you. What does mirror and shape mean? If you're not quite sure what the quote means, then take that time to go back to the text and locate it in the preface of the text, the page where it's referenced, and think a little bit more deeply about that. Do you agree with the quote? Do you disagree with the quote? Do you partially agree with the quote? All of those are perfectly fine. You do not have to agree with the quote. It's quite possible that some of you will say that's utter rubbish. I don't believe it. That's fine. As long as you can make that statement clearly and argue it through your essay, no one is going to say you're wrong. This is a critical reflective task. There is no wrong thesis statement. You just need to establish it and then argue it. So the thesis statement does really important work for this essay, and it takes a while to think about and develop. It provides a focus for your essay and the position from which to develop your supporting arguments. It helps facilitate a coherent and logical essay structure. As you can see there in that image, it's usually 1 or 2 sentences long. It's framed as a statement, clearly points out the subject of the writing, what you're going to talk about, and takes a stand rather than just announcing the topic. The second step is to brainstorm your ideas. This is a brain dump onto paper or electronically about everything you can think of to support your thesis or your position. You will not use it all, but it will really help organise your thinking. I'm reading lots of emails where people are saying, I don't know where to start. This is where you start. Once you've got your thesis, you can use the content and the topics to develop ideas and arguments to support it. Research and repeat. So one of the ideas might be about history. Write down everything that you think that you've read and know and understand about the history of education that's relevant to your position, your thesis statement. You will end up with too many ideas, and you'll need to make a decision to include the strongest and most coherent ones. This is pretty messy, and I know this is bothering some of you. There's a lot of information, there's a lot of big ideas. You just need to narrow the focus down to those that are A, are relevant to the position that you're taking, and B, are interesting to you. Now you've got your brain dump, your brainstorm, then you can start shaping those ideas into arguments. Now this is the what of your essay. So the arguments constitute the topics or the what you're going to cover. You need to substantiate then, think about these ideas, to substantiate these by providing evidence drawn from the learning materials and other sources. So that's when we're talking about a critically reflective essay. That's the so what. Who says this is important? Who agrees with you? Who disagrees with you? Then when the final thing you need to do around developing your arguments is to link the argument to the thesis, and if possible, preferably identify how or if assumptions and beliefs are or could be challenged or transformed by your thinkings or your statement. So that's the now what. So here's my argument. I might be talking about the purpose of education, just looking at that image there. I'm going to develop, use the content that I know to talk about the purpose of education, the what. I might use a definition from the text, and then I might say, but there are other definitions of education, and they include a whole range of these things. Then when you get, that's the so what, developing, substantiating that idea about the purpose of education, then linking your argument to the thesis or challenging some of those assumptions and beliefs and looking at that critical intention is to think about ways that your learning in the unit or your understanding or your definition of the purpose of education is transformative, how it might inform your practice in the future or how it might make the world a place worth living in, living well in a world worth living in. Your arguments, therefore, shape your critical reflection. It's important that you work through that process of what, so what, and now what for each and every one of those arguments. Step 4, draft your essay. This is a classic image on the right here about what constitutes an essay. So now you have your thesis and you've decided on your arguments and sources, you can start writing. Make sure you think about and plan the structure. Again, this is critical. You need an introduction, body paragraphs, and a conclusion. Planning this work takes time. Yes, you can write in first person, but try to limit it to as applicable. So if you're talking about a personal recollection or a personal reflection, then yes, use first person. You don't use headings, dot points, tables, or images in an academic essay of this style. References in text and a reference list are not included in the word count. So that's just the mechanics of that. Let's look more closely at the sections of this essay. But before we get there, some people, just reading some writing that's come in the reports, there's an absolute need for people to write a paragraph correctly, and you use whatever system that you follow, but an easy one is this one of Peel. So the point, the topic sentence, which is the what, the explanation or elaboration, more of the what, explaining the topic or the topic sentence a little more. The examples of evidence come into the so what, so this is substantiating what you're saying, and then finishing with the link is often around that now what. How does it connect to the next paragraph or back to your thesis? And how does it, can you identify any shifts or challenges to assumptions that again will link back to your thesis? So we're going through this critical reflection within each paragraph as well as across the whole essay. So we're looking for what, so what, and now what as we're reading your work. The overall structure of the essay will look like this. The introduction will be broad. The main purpose, or the arguments, can here you can see that this is made up of 4 arguments or 4 concepts with 2 paragraphs allocated to each of those. You don't have to do it this way. It's just an example of how you can construct that. It's probably a good idea, though, to work through a templated structure or thinking about it like this. So in the introduction, it sets the scene for your essay by stating your position. So you'll tell us what your thesis statement is there. It'll give an overview of the main ideas, so you're going to signpost your arguments. If you wish to, you can define the key terms in there. It will be really important somewhere in your essay to define what it is that you understand as education to be, and you clearly state your position. So in this essay, I will argue, or this essay argues that, blah, 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 blah. So the introduction is really important, and often it's one that we come back to many times and reshape. As we said before, the body is made up of those arguments that you've brainstormed. If you've come up with 4, then you've got 4 key arguments to be explained there. There is no hard and fast rules about whether you use 2 paragraphs to present one argument or 1 paragraph to present another argument. It's what will be clear is using that paragraph structure and the topic sentence, that if they're closely linked and well written, they will be obvious to the reader. The coherence of your paper is really, really important. The conclusion is also really important in this essay because it's where you draw all the ideas together and into a logical conclusion. This is sometimes where you'll get to a bit more of the now what. Having completed this work and understanding these concepts, I now know that I will. So you can talk about your work as a future educator, how it's changed your thinking. So that's very much just ticking off that now what, the next what. You must use APA 6 referencing style. We're not going to be pedantic about it, but it will detract from your work if you don't do this, and you will be marked down if you don't use it. It is one of the criteria for the task. So you must include in-text references for direct and indirect citations. If you're using someone else's idea, then you need to cite that person. If you didn't make it up yourself, there should be a citation. Paraphrasing is great, because if you overload your text with direct quotes, direct citations, it can be really dense to read. You need a reference list, which is a separate page at the end of your essay, of only the sources that you've cited in text. It is not a bibliography. There's some really clever resources in the SCU library guides. Please access that link for further information. Final step, edit and proofread. Does the essay flow? Read it aloud, ask a friend to read it. Think about these questions. Is it critical? Is it reflective? Is it informed? If it's you saying, I believe, I think, I know, I don't like, then it's not informed. It's not critical. It may be reflective, but that's not where it stops and ends. You need to be able to substantiate your ideas. Have you addressed the task criteria? Go back and look at those. Check for some common errors. So that what I was saying before, unsubstantiated claims. I think education has no purpose in shaping society. Full stop. That's an unsubstantiated claim. Have you made any claims, or have you just described what's in the text? Take your position. Where is your position? Most important that you do not that you don't just go through this as your essay and give us a summary of each of the topics. It's much more complicated than that, much more complex than that. So if you're still looking for help at the end of this, ask your tutor. We can guide, advise and suggest. We cannot provide one-on-one sessions or proofread drafts. You can form a study group to thrash out and exchange some ideas. Most importantly and most appropriately, click on the academic skills and or Studiosity links in the learning site to access a range of really helpful resources and, if required, make an appointment for targeted assistance. Thanks. I hope this has helped.